Okay, hyponatremia it is then. All of the basic principles of water homeostasis that we've talked about are going to be relevant. I'll reflect back to those, but I'll hope that, much of what we've already discussed has been internalized, that there was no amiloride blocking that knowledge from getting into the cell. Okay, let's go to the pragmatic evaluation of hyponatremia. First, you can use a step 1 to verify the patient is hypotonic. You measure the serum osmolality. Don't forget to correct for the ineffective osmols, okay? A classic mistake would be to take a patient who's in renal failure and has a BUN of 100, their sodium is 120. If you calculate their osmolality, it's going to be in the normal to high range. And you'll say, okay, this is pseudo hyponatremia because their osmolality is not low. But that's wrong, okay? We went over what's the difference between osmolality and tonicity, right? Tonicity tries to describe solutes that affect water balance across the semipermeable membrane. Glucose contributes to tonicity, okay? So hyponatremic patients who have hyperglycemia, we'll go over that, but that is a truly osmotically active particle, okay? Urea, on the other hand, is not, okay? It's one of the most common causes of this mistake of overcalling pseudo-hyponatremia. There are others that include alcohols, okay? So interestingly, we used a case of hyponatremia in a cirrhotic patient. I think it was Kelly and I that were on at that time. It was Kelly, I believe, who made this conclusion. This patient had a hyponatremia with a normal osmolality, and their glucose and urea were normal, okay? And that was the first sign to check a serum ethanol in that patient who claimed to be no longer drinking, okay? And so we said, oh, we added the ethanol level and found, oh yeah, she was drinking, even though she looked very unintoxicated on presentation, okay? In any case, you can correct for these differences in osmotically inactive particles. You can estimate a tonicity by taking the measured osmolality and the urea concentration, subtracting a normalish serum urea, dividing that number by 2.8, subtracting that from the measured osmolality. That will correct for an azotemia, okay? If you can also do the same for an individual who has an alcohol intoxication if you know the concentration of the alcohol, okay? You'll just need to know the correction factor, which is based on the molecular weight of these various alcohols. So ethanol, ethylene glycol, isopropyl alcohol, and methanol are given to you there, okay? So this is when alcohol is given to you in a milligram per deciliter concentration, okay? All right, so causes of hyponatremia when there is no hypotonicity include pseudohyponatremia. So what is pseudohyponatremia? Well, it is arising from an artifact that occurs with measuring serum sodium concentrations. The reality of normal physiology is that 1 liter of plasma has roughly, let's say, about 10% or so of lipid and protein, okay, and about 90% water. The sodium concentration in that 90% water is roughly 100 and I'm going to just say 154, so everything fits nicely, millimoles per liter, okay? But because you have only 900 cc's in this 1 liter, that is actually water, the sodium concentration in that 1 liter is roughly 140 millimoles. Okay? So this explains why isotonic saline has a concentration of 154. You're trying to give a fluid that is isotonic to plasma, water. Okay? But when you're measuring sodium concentration, you are measuring this plasma water influenced by, or the sodium concentration influenced by this lipid and protein content. Okay. Now, in the lab, they dilute the sample before measuring the plasma water concentration. Okay. So, if you were to have a larger proportion of non-aqueous volume, non-aqueous components, okay, when you dilute that sample, the sodium concentration drops more, right? Taken to a ridiculous degree, if again, let's say 30% of my plasma is now occupied by lipid and protein, when I do that dilution step, this sodium concentration in plasma water drops precipitously, okay? The analyzer doesn't know that. It assumes that you had this roughly 10% lipid and protein content. And so it measures that sodium falsely low because that dilution is more than normal, okay? And that correction for the dilution is not done by the analyzer. Okay, it just assumes you have the average amount of lipid and protein when it corrects back for that lipid and protein content. Okay, this is all important information as you explain to the resident why isotonic fluid doesn't have a concentration of 140, while you explain to the resident the phenomenon of pseudohyponatremia. Okay, it's all based on the same principle, which you can rationalize. Okay, and convince people to go into nephrology with that wisdom. Okay, extra points, shorten fellowship for everyone you succeed in doing. Okay. But I need a pre and post, proof pre and post. Some Facebook post or something. Pre and post. Okay. All right. So again, that's all what this text says in I've shown you in figure form. Okay. Here are some formulas that you can use to correct for hypertriglyceride or hyperproteinemia. If you want to correct that reported plasma sodium concentration, here's how you can do it. Okay, formulas I've given to you. All right. Now, of course, another cause of hyponatremia without hypotonicity is a case of hyponatremia with hypertonicity, right? And that's what this is, hypertonic hyponatremia. And the classic one that you're going to see, or the most common one, is the hyperglycemic patient. So this patient has a true hyponatremia, okay? There is maybe some misnomer of this is not a true hyponatremia. It is a true hyponatremia. They're just not hypotonic, right? So through the influence of this osmotically active particle that is glucose, I have water leaving the cell under the influence of this very high glucose concentration. Okay, and therefore my sodium concentration truly does drop. It is a true hyponatremia. Okay. If you want to estimate how much of the sodium is dropped by the glucose concentration, here is one formula. There are different formulas that are out there. This is one of those that is based on empiric evidence. Okay. If I give an individual other hypertonic solutes such as mannitol, that would be another cause of potential hypertonic hyponatremia. Now, that individual would have to have an impairment of renal function. That would be an odd case. Most patients would not receive hypertonic mannitol if you had impaired renal function. But presumably, let's suppose somebody developed AKI after receiving a bunch of hypertonic mannitol. That could be a theoretical situation in which water translocation occurs. In general, when you give hypertonic mannitol, osmotic diuresis ensues and you get hypernatremic. So you would have to posit a interesting or weird hypothetical giving hypertonic mannitol to somebody who has acute kidney injury. That can cause a shift of water to the ECF. Okay. Older preparations of IVIG had concentrations of sucrose, sometimes mannitol, that were high compared to serum osmolality and could cause a mild hyponatremia if you got large volumes of IVIG if they were hyperosmolar preparations. These days, most IVIG that we are giving is isoosmolar because of a risk of osmotic nephrosis or an acute kidney injury from the administration of hypertonic solutions, IVIG being one of those. Okay. Step 2. So again, step 1 was verify the patient was hypotonic. You can do that by correcting for elevations in urea or alcohols. If they're hypernatremic, or have pseudohyponatremia, those are unique hyponatremias. The step 2 would be to measure the urinary handling of water. Okay, and that is done through measuring urine osmolality, the electrolytes in the urine, which will allow you to calculate, for instance, electrolyte-free water clearance. I usually, mostly for learning, check a urine urea. In general, your urine osmolality, if you don't have glycosuria, will be equal to 2 times sodium plus potassium plus urea divided by 2.8. Okay? That would generally be true. I usually use that to just teach. These are your main osmols in the urine: sodium, potassium, and urea. That's not completely true. We even use an osmolar gap to intuit how much ammonium is in the urine. So it's not perfect, but it should be relatively close as long as someone doesn't have glycosuria. Okay. Urine volume as well is important so that you can calculate electrolyte-free water clearance. We've already gone over that. The appropriate response to a hypotonic state would be to try and excrete free water. So that's a positive electrolyte-free water clearance. Remember, we said negative free water clearance would lower your sodium, right? That's the scenario in which you're dumping salt faster than water. Okay, positive free water clearance would suggest the sodium will tend to come up in the right scenario. Okay. Step 3, as you order these tests, interpret them wisely by understanding things that alter the normal physiologic response. Okay. So let's talk about the physiologic response in terms of these parameters and then things that can alter them. Okay. If I have a hypotonic patient, I should lower my urine osmolality to a relatively low value, 200 or so. Things that might impair this dilution include, well, the patient is actually hypertonic. So a hyponatremia from hyperglycemia would tell my brain to be thirsty as well as secrete ADH. So my urine osmolality would obviously not be low in that scenario, right? I'm responding to hypertonicity, okay? Obviously, if I have pseudo-hyponatremia as well, my urine osmolality can be variable. The most common thing that makes my urine insufficiently dilute is any cause of low effective circulating volume. Remember, we talked about thirst is regulated by tonicity and low effective circulating volume. ADH is regulated by tonicity and low effective circulating volume. If there's a battle between the two, tonicity and circulating volume wins. Makes sense? The body's saying, I'm threatened by your hypernatremia, but I'm more threatened, or hyponatremia, let's say, use that term. I'm threatened by this hyponatremia or hypotonicity, but I'm more threatened by the fact that I'm hypovolemic. I better retain water. Okay, so circulating volume wins. Classic causes of low circulating volume are provided. True volume depletion, and then your third spaced conditions. Okay. CKD, or chronic tubular injury, also diminishes the capacity of the kidney to dilute the urine. So with a CKD kidney, or let's say chronic tubulopathy from, let's use, cisplatin or sickle cell. Sickle cell is another cause of chronic tubular injury. Sickle cell disease, not trade. Those individuals might have a relatively narrow bandwidth in their urine osmolality. They can neither concentrate or dilute. The term for that is isostenuria. Neither terribly concentrated or dilute. SIDH is obviously a scenario in which urine osmolality is not maximally dilute. Non-steroidals, we already went over that. They potentiate the effect of vasopressin. For any vasopressin level that's manifest, the absorption of water is enhanced through aquaporins by this effect of nonsteroidals on prostaglandins regulating aquaporin activity. Okay, summarized. Nonsteroidals do a lot of different things for the nephrologists. They cause sodium retention and can exacerbate heart failure. They cause water retention, make sodium levels drop. They cause potassium retention, cause hyperkalemia. Okay, so number of things. Here's one of those that is relevant to this conversation. Glucocorticoid deficiency. It also increases vasopressin activity or vasopressin release. We talked about that as well. That corticotropin releasing hormone is also a vasopressin secretagogue. Okay, remember, if I have low glucocorticoids, okay, then I have high corticotropin releasing hormone, which is stimulating ACTH. Remember that? That's the response to low glucocorticoids. Corticotropin releasing hormones also has some regulation of vasopressin as well. Okay, so if I have, that's why glucocorticoid deficiency, even if you don't have hypovolemia from combined mineralocorticoid deficiency, just a pure glucocorticoid deficiency can cause hyponatremia. Primary adrenal insufficiency with both glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid deficiency can cause vasopressin release through this mechanism, as well as low ECV, right? Salt wasting, low ECV would also stimulate vasopressin. Okay? All right. Reset osmostat, you might say, is a form of SIADH. Some people just classify it as such. Okay? There are a variety of causes of reset osmostat. Normal pregnancy is a classic, very common cause of reset osmostat. Remember what reset osmostat is? It's that I can dilute, I can concentrate, just like you dilute and concentrate. You might have a set point of 140. I just have a different set point, right? At 130, that's my threshold of either concentrating or diluting, okay? Often elderly, chronically ill, underweight patients can often manifest this reset osmostat physiology as well, okay? And I think I've talked about this already. So as long as you have a set point or a sodium value that's different from your set point, if it's above 130, for instance, I will start concentrating if my set point was 130. If my sodium drops to 128, I'll start diluting. Just like you, where you do it around 140, this individual does it around 130, okay? Let's just quickly go over these others, which I can do pretty quickly, and then I'll end it there. Sodium is your biomarker of circulating volume. That's really why you check your sodium in the urine. And there's two categories, low and not low, okay? There's not low and normal. There's really no normal, okay? Low and not low. And you're looking for a low urine sodium as an explanation or an indicator of low effective circulating volume causing this high urine osmolality. Okay, low urine sodium would give you the clue that this is a case of low effective circulating volume. Scenarios in which that is not as reliable is, well, obviously, if you have a mineralocorticoid deficiency, I can't maximally conserve sodium in some cases. If you get volume depleted enough, even in the face of mineralocorticoid deficiency, you render your urine sodium quite low. Or if I have CKD, interstitial nephritis, active diuretic therapy would obviously cause a urine sodium that may not be low, even though I'm volume depleted, right? And then this entity, cerebral salt wasting, if it exists. Volume, the normal response to hypotonicity is to make a relatively large volume of dilute urine, okay? Positive free water clearance. Individuals who might have a low urine volume and low effective free water or electrolyte free water clearance include anything that causes a concentrated urine, right? So those would cause a low urine volume. If I have concentrated urine, that is a high urine osmolality. If I have significant kidney injury, I often say this, sometimes we overcomplicate hyponatremia in our AKI patients. They're hyponatremic because they're not making any urine, right? Doesn't matter what your vasopressin is. Doesn't matter what your urine osmolality is. If you're making very little urine, you can't excrete free water, okay? Low solute intake is the other main cause of low urine volume in a patient who has low tonicity or is hypotonic, okay? Even if you have a relatively dilute urine, low solute intake would contract the amount of water I can eliminate. We already went over that. I've erased it. Remember, urine volume is equal to my osmolar excretion in the numerator over my osmolality. So this is the principle that underpins the tea and toast hyponatremia. Okay. Primary polydipsia, has a very dilute, large urine volume. Okay, so we can certainly recognize that as we're approaching some hyponatremic patients who have very large dilute urine volumes. That would be the clue that this is a case of primary polydipsia. Okay.